Olá, moça. Oi, Sônia, tudo bem? Vamos entrando, moçada, tudo certo com vocês? Logo mais nós começamos. Ó, até o Iberê aí. E aí, Iberê? Então, boa noite, eu diria, pro pessoal que tá entrando agora. Logo mais a gente chama o nosso convidado em acho que uns 4 minutos a gente chama ele. E por enquanto, vão se aproximando aí. A minha gata acordou agora, mas eu espero que ela se comporte, que ela não faça barulho. Ela ainda não deu a cara aqui nas lives, mas em algum momento eu sei que ela ainda vai. Ela gosta de falar bastante, eu sei que em algum momento ela vai chegar aqui e vai querer ser entrevistada também. Mas por enquanto ela está se comportando. E já vou avisando pro pessoal, não se esqueçam de que, se eu também não me esquecer, na sexta-feira, às 2 da tarde, no Brasil, a gente vai ter a nossa live com a Sara Ferrandes. Isso, 2 horas no Brasil. Isso. Às vezes é complicado, porque a pessoa que a gente entrevista num horário, o Brasil tá em outro, eu tô em outro. E aí dá uma confusão total. E aí também, mais uma curiosidade, que no final desse mês, eu acho que dia 28 por aí, mas eu sei que é nos últimos dias do mês, a gente vai ter mais uma live, que vai ser uma live com professores que já participaram, mas vão ser mais de um que vão estar. E vai ser uma live meio não aleatória, mas vai ser uma live especial. E a gente provavelmente vai fazer ela no Facebook. A gente vai testar o Facebook, já que agora a gente tá lá. Eu sei que a gente começou tudo no YouTube, mas eu acho que no Facebook a gente vai conseguir. A gente vai conseguir arrumar algumas coisas. E a gente quer testar também, porque a gente tá. A gente gosta de testar, a gente tem que mudar as coisas. Enfim. Em mais alguns minutinhos eu chamo o nosso convidado. Deixa eu ver aqui. Espero que ele entre também, né? Vamos ver aqui. O grande Lucas tá aqui também. O Lucas estava no encontro de violas em Curitiba 2017, se não me engano. É. A gente conhece um monte de gente no encontro de violas. Deixa eu ver aqui. Uhum. Logo mais chamamos nosso convidado. Esperem mais um minutinho. Eu já o chamo aqui. Alright. Então, moçada, vou convidar aqui o nosso convidado de hoje, que é o Jordan Bak. Conectando.
Hi,
Hello! How are you?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
I am fine. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh,
Also,
thank you so much for having me. This is a treat.
yes, so my name is Israel. I'm the one who has been talking to you.
Yeah.
So welcome to the Two Violins Live. We call ourselves Two Violins, but we're actually three people.
Oh,
And yes, and I'm the one responsible for all the international artists that we talk
oh,
to.
nice.
Yes, so it's very nice to meet you, even though it's online, but it's my pleasure and it's an honor to have you here.
Oh, thank you. Likewise, likewise.
Yeah. Are you in New York right now? How are things
I'm actually
there?
in Connecticut right now. Yeah, well, I mean, not too far, about hour and a half from New York right now.
Uh-huh. How are things there though?
What's that?
How are things in Connecticut? Because
In Connecticut,
Corona 2020.
it's not so bad. Yeah, it's right now, I mean, of course, everybody's taking precautions with, of course, the coronavirus that is impacting the world right now. But Connecticut is also part of the quarantine travel restriction that New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut are all sort of teaming up to, to sort of lower the amount of people coming in because I guess all of the three states have worked so hard and also my parents are also healthcare workers in New York, so I know how hard it has been for them. And so I think there are, in the 30s, 30 something states are not allowed in to this. I mean, you're allowed, but you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. But otherwise, from that, things are okay. Still wearing masks and still trying to be away from the general public unless you have to be. But otherwise, it's good. It's good here. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, good to know that you guys are doing okay. I live in West Texas and things are kind of
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah, we even made it to the New York Times because people are anyways. Uh,
Mhm.
so we always start by asking a little bit about your background. We always post the bio of our guests, but it's nice to hear from you how you started your viola journey.
Mm, yeah. I started in the public school system in New York. So I'm from New York originally. I started in the public school system when I was about 8 years old. And so it was mandatory to pick an orchestral instrument, to study in music class. At the time, it was music class. And so my first choice was violin, and then I think second choice was viola, third choice was cello, and then probably some, woodwind instrument or something like that. Um, and they didn't have any violins. And so they gave me this viola. Well, it wasn't actually a viola, I was too small. So it was a violin with just, viola strings on it. But at the time, I didn't think it was a real instrument. You can imagine 8-year-old me, right, doesn't think the viola is real, has never heard of the viola in his life. I'm so upset. I go home, I tell my mom, they gave me this horrible instrument. It's not a violin, therefore it's not real. And
Wow.
me trying to play a scale on this thing. I have never had a lesson before. My bow is going like this. It's
Yeah.
that was me when I was 8, and so I really didn't. I never think of it as a love at first sight sort of thing, with the viola. But later on, a few years after that, I had joined the Children's Orchestra Society in Long Island, and that's really where I guess I began to get some exposure to youth orchestra and chamber music and kind of having, some sort of lessons. It wasn't regular. We did not have, the income at the time to have regular lessons beyond everything else that we were doing as kids, but that was some sort of a regular thing that I would go to every Saturday. And so that was where I began to fall in love with that sound, it's such a human sound that it has. And, the program is run by Yo-Yo's sister, Yu Chang Ma. And so, lots of wonderful artists come to play as guest artists with concertos and, give master classes and chamber music coachings. And so I was very lucky to have some experience with that before going off to school. And so when I left New York, I moved to Boston. I studied at NEC, went to NEC for my undergrad, my bachelor's. And it was a great place. I mean, Boston, I still love Boston. This Jordan Hall is, such an amazing hall. And really, I think I had such a wonderful time there those past 4 years. And then after that, I went back to New York and I studied at Juilliard. So I went to Juilliard for my master's with Sinyun Huang, who was actually one of the COS guest artists, come to think of it. That's where I first met her. was when I was like a high schooler and she came to play the Bartok concerto. Funny how things turn around, you know. So 5 years after that, I was studying with her. And so I had studied with her for 2 years. And then after that, I was very lucky to have earned a position in the artist diploma program at Juilliard. They don't accept a lot of people. I think I was the first violist in a number of years to get it. So I'm very honored to to have that. And so those past 2 years I had studied with Sam Rhodes, the former violist of the Juilliard Quartet. And so that is, I guess, my whole background in a nutshell. Yeah.
Wow, it's awesome how you went from being the kid that didn't even think that it wasn't a real instrument to, the first person violist to be accepted in the artist diploma program of Juilliard. That's that's not something you
Amazing,
see
right?
every day.
It still surprises me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, Awesome. One of the questions that we got is that, Juilliard is just such a well-known school in the entire world. And every time we have a guest that went there, we like to ask what actually feels like to be at Juilliard and what's the life at Juilliard, if
Mm.
you wouldn't mind telling us about it.
Yeah, you know, I would say from, I guess, my perspective of being an undergraduate student that didn't go to Juilliard, of course, when you attend a school that isn't Juilliard, of course, with any school, there is some, you hear this and you hear that Juilliard is very cutthroat and you hear that, it's very competitive and people are not nice and there isn't a sense of community, some of these things, in terms of the negative. Of course, Juilliard is, a position of excellence, especially in New York City in the conservatory field. For me, going to Juilliard after undergrad, I particularly felt that there was a sense of community. When I came there to audition, there were some of the warmest people, just, in the audition rooms and, just people who were, current students helping out. And later on, when I decided to attend, I was very fortunate to be a part of, an amazing viola studio. It was a very large viola studio, but with Heidi Castleman and Misha Amory and so on. But one thing that I will always take away from that is just the sense of community that they somehow bring, every, whatever it is, Wednesday night, whenever the studio classes are. And it's so much more than just, okay, a bunch of violists coming to a room and each one plays and something and blah, 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 It was always so much more than that. And so for me, Juilliard has always been a place where I've been inspired. I've been inspired and motivated, and really worked hard. I think um, one necessarily can't necessarily expect to have a sense of community there, and I think perhaps it might work for that type of person who is very individual, who is able to sort of focus without necessarily having other people or other, people to kind of be there and to create that community, that support system. I think if you're a very individual person, then Juilliard really works.
Was it too different from the neck?
Um, I think it was, I think it was. I mean, every school is just different in terms of its own position and its own, culture, and it can go beyond, architecture and faculty and sound culture and things like that. I think they're different in that sense. One is very, brutalist architecture, sort of diamonds and this, that, and the other one is very ornate and it really showcases the history of, 1867 when it was founded. And different people teach there and different people have different ideas of the sound that they want and different values. And so I think it's much deeper than just a surface level of what's different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, uh-huh. And it's interesting when you talk about the conception of sound, the types
Mm.
of sounds that they have. Do you feel like it was too different when you went to Europe? I know that you already had another Instagram live with Iberê, which was awesome, and you guys talked a little bit about
Oh,
it. Um,
yes.
yeah, I love the series that he is doing right now. It's
Mhm.
very and it's also very necessary. Um,
Yeah.
But talking about the conception of sound and the conception that people have of music, how is that like different from the United States?
Mm. Um, I think, sort of looking back on my time, whenever I was able to attend and play concerts and, during the time when I had been participating in master classes in Europe, um, there were things musically that I wish could have been emphasized even more or somehow been made more innate, more natural in how we study things and how we perceive things in US music culture. And perhaps that sort of expands to, what we look for in orchestra auditions, perhaps, or what we look for in, who's going to be the next violist in X quartet, or, who's going to be the next it thing that gets a Carnegie Hall debut. I think, in terms of the musical and the technical and the what you can do beyond just facilitating it on the instrument. I think what I've noticed in Europe is there's something that's so much more natural, almost to a point where it can't really be explained. We tend to focus on a lot of explanation, and this is how you do things, and everything is done in a method, and it can be the Suzuki method when you're young, and then the whatever method Karen Tuttle you could study with this particular person and have this philosophy of how things work, and you use that as a manual, like an instruction manual of how to play a Brahms sonata. But something that I noticed over there is that doesn't exist, and it really shouldn't exist, right? You shouldn't have to play things according to a manual. You should really feel what it is. And so I think that's the main difference. Of course, I feel at this point that things are evolving, where it isn't necessarily one thing. It's a multitude of systems and, schools and, a kind of a melting pot of ideas because people travel all the time. Um, but that's something that I've noticed, but at the same time, it's already changing as we speak about it.
Uh-huh. And you were talking about the comments that you made are the comments that I hear like all the time when I speak to people that came here to the United States and people who, went to Europe, and it's just very interesting. But when you play, I feel like it's so expressive and so, it's so natural. My actually my favorite video of yours is the Bach that you played in your room solo,
Oh,
for violin.
yes.
Um, it's especially because it was for like a very specific cause, and you're not like trying to win a competition or something, but it was just so expressive.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say it's in a certain way very different from how I see people playing here in the US. So
Mm.
how are you able to, if we were to say that there was this barrier that you were talking about the manual and how Europeans don't do that, how were you able to break that barrel barrier?
Mm. Just a whole bunch of listening. That's the short answer, is a whole bunch of listening. And I think um, we have to, in order to sort of break whatever that is, what you study from your teacher. I guess when you're in school, your primary teacher is like, the person who you listen to the most because you show up to a lesson every week, and this is how you approach this, and this. You also have to listen to every other person that isn't your teacher or isn't an artist that you admire. We tend to sort of stick to the people that we know and that we like. You also have to listen to people you don't necessarily care for because there is value, in no matter how unconventional and just non-traditional it is, chances are there is something you can learn from it. And so for me to appreciate Bach in that particular style, Ibera is here, hi. Um, to appreciate Bach in that particular style, you have to do the listening and you have to you have to do so much listening that it becomes a part of something that you understand you know and yeah, I realize, of course, I realize that it is not many people over here play like that, and so that's something I was very fortunate to work with, people, historical I guess, period instrument players during my time over in Europe and also at Juilliard, fortunately. And I guess all of those influences I've sort of internalized, and that's how that really happened. It's interesting that you say that because, that particular video, it was kind of a direct response to how, how I was feeling and how things happened. And I just, turned a camera on and recorded it. There was no, no preparation behind it. It was just, you know what? I want to share something. And that was what it was, So it was, my hair was like, it was like this, it wasn't particularly I just didn't think about it, But it's at the end of the day, that's what it is, We're just trying to share things.
I mean, to me, it was the most honest playing because you were, again, you were not trying to impress anyone. You were not trying to like win a competition. It was just you're just playing for this one cause, and it was just
Mm.
so direct into my heart. It was awesome. Anyways,
Oh,
that's yeah, I love that video. And but yeah, and besides just listening to a lot of music and artists that you might not like that much, which is very interesting that you said, I had for so much time I had a lot of trouble listening to Pablo Casal's Bach.
oh
Um,
yeah.
of course, but it's not like you can't learn anything from it. But besides that, is there anything else that you do, maybe even outside from music, that helps you to be expressive?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Um, it's difficult to say, in terms of like things that are not particularly music related. I don't think that, things that are part of, I guess, my influence have necessarily a correlation with how I particularly play. Um, I wish I had a better answer because, there's so many artists that I know that they sang in like in church when they were growing up, and some person in their life was, a singer or a cantor or something like that. My mom came from Manchester, Jamaica, and my dad is a New Yorker, and both of them are healthcare workers, and nobody else, nobody else was a musician on my end. It was just sort of like, even both of my parents were like, how did, how, what, where did it come from? I don't know. Um, and, also my dad is a mechanic, so he doesn't really, I mean, he understands music and he always comes to my concerts, but, in terms of the ability, he's always very hands-on and sort of like tool kind of guy. So, I don't really know, to be honest. I don't really know where it comes from. I think it's just an innate sort of thing that I particularly feel. Um, yeah, sort of besides listening, I just feel like there is something, within myself that I know that, okay, this is right. This is what it should sound like, and I'm going to make it sound like that. You know what I mean? It's just something that I just know. Yeah.
Well, I wish I could do that so easily. And that's awesome. Um, the questions that people were asking me the most were obviously about competitions because you are a pro and that matter. So how do you prepare for a competition? Because sometimes you have competitions where you have 3 hours of music, and I mean, how do you make it happen?
I think one of the first things to understand is every competition is different. And for me, one of the first things I do whenever I enter or did enter was to kind of get a sense of the requirements for the competition and also a general sense, if you can, of the schedule. Because there are other things besides like directly preparing for the competition and the repertoire that you don't really think about. Example of, I'm not going to necessarily say what competition, but the waiting game was excruciating. It's, after you play the round, there was one where I had to wait 2 whole days to find out if I passed. That, nobody knows, and there's no real advice of how to mentally deal with that,
What
because
did
you're
you
obsessing
do?
over, you obsess over it, you obsess over what's, after the round, and okay, this, did I do this right, and did it sound as good as, I maybe have thought. um Nobody really talks to you about the waiting game. also, I guess in direct response to your question, nobody really talks about actually practicing the performing aspect of the competition. And so that's something that I learned when I was in school. I was never told, this was never a thing that I was told before entering school. Um, because things that you don't really think about in direct, when you're practicing, when you're actually practicing the repertoire and the facility of the playing and what you can do and, all the musical things that you can do correct. Nobody talks about nerves, nobody talks about the actual performing of the gestures and all of the, how are you going to stand? How are you going to breathe? How are you going to do this, 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 this? Nobody talks about it. All we're focused on is intonation and phrasing and vibrato and this, 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 this. So, one thing that I had been doing during competitions is practicing all of those other aspects of, something, for example, not necessarily running through the entire piece, but just starting the beginning up until about 30 seconds. Do that 10 times and notice and jot down how you felt, not necessarily what you can do better, but how you felt. Imagine that you're in the round and you're in a big hall and there are 6 people out there just note taking, note taking, note taking. It's intimidating, right? Start it once, notate what it feels like, start it again. And so what you're doing is actually practicing that, the performing aspect, not necessarily the music, because you've done that. You've been doing that for months. But the actual performing part, and also, the standing, and also, what happens between, finishing one piece or one movement and starting the next. Because sometimes you have competitions where you have a 25-minute limit and you can't go over. Otherwise, they ring the bell and then you have to leave the stage. So you have to figure out, okay, what's the minimum amount of time that I can give myself to lower that heart rate, right? Figure out what the sound of that next piece is and really execute it to the best of my ability. So all of these little things you have to think about kind of goes under the umbrella of practicing performing. That's something that I had never thought about before, really trying out and entering competitions and being a student. Yeah.
Do you also practice with the attire?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do. Leading up to the competition, before, if I know in a couple months that I'm entering the competition, I really don't care. It's fine. But if it's about maybe a few days before I'm getting on a flight to the actual place, I'll do it. And then also once I get there and you get your sort of welcome packets and you kind of meet the other competitors. Of course, the nerves are sort of coming back, right? The adrenaline is coming back, and so around that time, I'll also start practicing in my actual attire because it's true, it does feel different. Different fabrics can do different things. It's a different feeling. So yeah, I do some of that.
Uh-huh. And like, how do you, I'm just wondering, because that's not something that I think that people talk about a lot, or I haven't heard a lot about, which is that the competition is you have to please the judges, regardless of how many people are watching, it's about the judges. So how do you choose, how do you make the interpretation choices to be able to please the judges?
Mm. Um, I used to, I think I'm just sort of thinking about, I guess, my mindset when I started doing competitions versus, the past competitions that I've done and I've won prizes in. I did start to think about that in the beginning when what are the judges going to think of, how I play this phrase or, the type of vibrato I use or, this, that, whatever interpretation. And then after that, I really just decided on, what? I'm just going to do what's correct. I'm going to do what's correct, first of all, right? What's written on each page of each, whatever piece that you're doing. Do what's on the page, but also do what you believe in. Because that, I feel, as an artist, is so much more important than just winning over the jury. Because, what I've thought about, I guess, in recent years is, if I'm going to base my interpretation on what the jury finds, pleasing, that's just winning an exam. That's not being an artist. The real artist is somebody who's going to do what is correct, but is going to do what they believe in, not what the judges believe in, what you believe in. Because at the end of the day, if you do win the prize, right? If you do win one of those prizes, and some of those prizes get you really good concerts, really good concert debuts, when you get to the debut, you've got to really show that you're an artist and not just, the highest score on the exam, right? And so that's what I think now, and that took a bit of growing, throughout, all of these different experiences. But I think that's such an important thing of not only doing what's on the page, but really being yourself, being yourself and doing what you feel is right.
Okay, and nice. And now about something that every human being that is alive has to deal with, anxiety. What is your, what's your, how do you deal with it?
Mm. Um, I wish that I had a tried and true method, and I'm sure every artist wishes they had a tried and true method. I'll tell you that, when I was a student, when I was in my undergrad, I used to get so nervous before playing. Um, and it wasn't good. When I think back on, earlier performances of, it would basically be how well I could hold up rather than, listening to the actual music. That's what I thought of my own, recordings and my own performances. Um, but when I went later on to my master's, I was fortunate, to be with a teacher that really understood that, and finding your breath is such an important thing. And it's something that, I think I overlooked, thinking about it, because when we're told to breathe, oftentimes we just start the phrase with a breath, right? We
Mm.
start, like, we just start the music and you hear the breath, and then after that there's nothing. It's just, there's no continuous there's no continuous breathing at all. And so that's something that you have to be aware of, and something I've had to work to be aware of, is how often I'm actually inhaling and exhaling, besides the music, because you know what the music is. But if you're not actively breathing with the music, you're not really executing the music. You're just executing, a sort of a parody in the back of your mind of what the music is, while trying to hold your composure, which doesn't work. It doesn't work. Finding your breath is such an important thing, and I live by that. If I had known that earlier, some things could have been so much better. But yes, I used to get so nervous before playing. But now, it's not so bad. Now it's, once you find space, also finding just a space where you can be alone, and, not a lot of visuals, just sort of, quiet everything down, also quiet everything down in the mind and also in here. Um, Everything sort of mellows out, and you can sort of chill and be on stage and be who you are, no matter what the circumstances. Yeah.
So you also practice your breathing with your playing when you're in the practice room. That's not
Oh,
something
yeah.
like natural, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. And with that, I also practice recording. Um, I remember a situation where I was asked, I think it was a class or something, where, a teacher mentioned, okay, I'm just going to record this. And he didn't actually record it, but just the act of pushing a record button just infinitely, just it makes you so much more nervous. Just the psychological makes you so much more nervous. And I actually practice that way, because for me, that's something that ramps me up a little bit, is especially, back in the day when I was recording, pre-screenings or audition tapes or things like that. The act of pressing a record button makes you so much more nervous, because you have a camera now, you have a microphone, versus, you just be practicing, by yourself. It's a different sort of feeling. And so I do a combination of that, practicing breathing and pushing that record button to see what it feels like.
hmm What do you do right before you go on stage? Like,
Oh, what do I write?
oh no, sorry. What do you do right before you go to stage? Like,
Oh,
say
what
30
do I do
minutes.
right before I go on
Yes,
stage?
like 30 minutes prior to your performance. What is your?
Mm. Um, it varies a little bit every time, depending on how I'm feeling. I don't really have a routine. I know, some people do have a routine of, they have to have, a banana 24 minutes before the thing starts, and they have to have their dark chocolate, and they have to, some people take naps 5 minutes before they go on stage. For me, it's a bit different. I think one thing that is consistent is I don't really eat about like an hour before I go on stage. Um, there would be a point, when I was getting really nervous, there would be a point where I just wouldn't eat, about, 6 or so hours before, and I'd just be so nervous. But now I'm just continuously snacking, continuously snacking, backstage,
What's
whatever
your
I can
snack?
find. Yeah, it's changed, the complete.
Mm.
But I guess I, genuinely am just relaxing or whatever, and I guess within 20 minutes, that's when I go backstage. I always start with scales, to just sort of orient myself when I'm in the dressing room. And just little passages or openings. Really, I mean, I start, I guess, with scales and then openings of passages. If I'm playing a concerto, I'll start it a couple of times. And then I'll go into some melodic passages, and then at the very end, the tricky stuff. At the
Yeah.
very end, 1 or 2 minutes before, they're like, okay, we gotta go. 1 or 2 minutes before I'm practicing, all my 30-second notes and all the fast stuff and all the runs. That's when I do that. And then showtime is showtime. So it's not really much of a routine, and some of that changes a little bit, but that's generally what I do.
Awesome. And as someone who, travels a lot and has such a, well, I don't know about Corona time right now, but I know that your schedule is pretty busy when you
Mm.
have competitions and, orchestra gigs. Are you able to have a consistent practice routine? And what do you practice, you know?
Mm. That's a good question. Lately that has changed. I think, of course, everything has changed, hasn't it? So, um, now I still start with scales. I still do all my scales, or whatever I'm feeling during the day. I start with scales and do my arpeggios and some double stops, whatever I'm feeling. Not like strict, I have to do everything in order and then do all of my arpeggios according to this particular method and do these thirds, four notes per. Other people have like really concrete methods of practicing their warm-ups. Something that I did learn from a really well-known violist is to practice your scales as if they're actual pieces. And I didn't think of that before. I always thought of scales as just okay, warm-up routine, sort of get the feeling of the fingers. But those could also be because they're melodic, right? Just by nature, they're melodic. Those could also be melodies, and you can play them like melodies. Also arpeggios, right? You can play them as you can play them as runs as if they were concerto runs. So I start with that. I always try to keep Bach in my practice. Always try to keep Bach in my practice. If it's one movement of anything, a cello suite, if it's one movement of one of the violin sonatas or partitas, or maybe an arrangement of one of the violin and harpsichord sonatas, really anything. I always try to keep that in it consistent in my practice routine. And then beyond that, within the next amount of time, also depending on how much time I have, which is, now it's much more than I had before.
Yeah.
But how much time I did have, it would be whatever. I would generally keep like a list of the things that I would be working on, whether it's, contemporary music by new composers or, some chamber music that I have to practice if I'm doing, a concert which requires me to play like 4 different chamber music works. To practice some things, do some score studying. Um, and that is sort of like on rotation, and that also depends on how close how close the date is, right? So if I have something that's within a few days, that's what's really priority. So I guess scales, Bach, and then depending on repertoire, depending on what the priority is at the given time. But I guess the same thing sort of applies now with live streaming concerts and any sort of like online engagements, because we're kind of limited to that right now over on our end. Whatever needs whatever needs performing, and also, I guess in this sense with live streaming, also whatever you need to sort of speak about, because it's not really just, you don't really have a presenter anymore that's sort of, here's Jordan Bak giving a recital. You have to do that. You have to do the talking, and you have to kind of, be personable, and you have to, that's another aspect of what you're doing. And so that's also, it takes some time in your practice routine. So yeah, that's the way it works for me.
I'm just really curious about the Bach, because there are a lot of people who tell me that they always practice Bach like every day that they can, and
Mm.
when I ask them what what they pay attention for when they play Bach, besides just the ringing of the sound, whatever else that they answer is very interesting. So I wanted to know from you, besides having a really ringy sound, what else do you pay attention for when you want to play Bach?
Mm. All of the different corners. There are so many different corners in Bach in terms of I've been working on fugues lately, and so this is a topic that I've been thinking about. It's like, where does the fugue start and where does it actually end? And where does the counter subjects start and where do they actually end? And also, little things, occasional high notes that come back from this, one end, and then in the next measure another, and then the next measure another. How many lines can you spot? And how do you connect them, and what to let go of and what to hold on to with the bow. And so every time it's different, for example, the chaconne. I mean, that there are so many different ways of which you can spot different corners in the chaconne. I mean, it's, 14, 15 minutes, or, depending on how long you play it. But, you know, around those different variations of what the actual chaconne is, there are so many little things that differ from it. And each time you interpret it, it's something different that you notice. And so that's something that I keep with me, not only in the chaconne, but for example, I'm actually working on the C major fugue now from the third violin sonata, which is so hard on
Yep.
viola. It's a real beast, that one. But also, also the cello suites, third cello suite, fourth cello suite. I mean, there's so many corners in the prelude and fugue of the fifth, the C minor cello suite. And so, yeah, all of the different corners, different melodies, different supporting melodies, and bass. Everybody loves bass
Yep.
in the Bach. Yes, yeah.
That's awesome. And you were talking about, I just really wanted to ask about the Bach, but where I was going next is because in this quarantine time, you were talking about how you have to, besides just playing the music, you have to present yourself, you have to do, here's Jordan Bach, so all the extra musical things. And I was just wondering what for you is important in the extra musical part of things as an artist.
Mm. Well, I mean, of course there is the musical, right? There is, beyond just, playing well and playing, you know, however well you can play, different pieces of repertoire. But to do that in a way musically that is human and convincing and honest, that's something that I really look for. Honesty and authenticity, because, you can play the longest lines ever, but if it's not genuine, it doesn't work, you know. But to also, in recent times, I guess, and particularly in the 21st century, this is a new generation of artists, and I'm sure everybody looking, I'm just seeing, all of the people that are joining in this chat right now. Everybody here I can see is a 21st century artist. And so there's that added thing of, what exactly am I trying to say in the music? And how am I using my music as more than just what it is? How am I using it as a platform to speak on, whatever sort of conversations that is going on in art and in the world right now? And how am I being influenced by the world to play my art? And so there's always sort of a dialogue that we as 21st century artists are thinking about in terms of music, but also the world. And so I guess there's different lenses of looking at, what I think is that extra, extra thing. And so, I mean, on one end, it's that really innate and honest musical persona, and on the other, maybe not necessarily on the other end, because I think they are kind of related, is, um, how the influences of, from true life, from the world, and how does that influence how you play something, you know? And what sort of story are you going to tell behind your Bach or your, if you're working on a contemporary piece by whomever, whatever composer, besides just doing that justice, like what is your stamp on this?
Hmm. That's amazing. That's amazing. Wow, that's an amazing answer. Um, what we're kind of getting to the end, but before my last question, I'm just curious to know what do you do besides playing the viola? Because even though sometimes people don't associate to their musical life, it's what it makes you the person that you are. So I'm
Mm.
just curious to know who is Jordan Bach when he doesn't have a viola in his hands.
Oh, well, I guess the more people know about me, I love cars. And my dad, of course, was a mechanic, and you know, he's a hospital worker, but he used to be a part-time mechanic, and now he does it as a hobby. And so, whenever I don't have my viola, I'm behind the wheel of a a very loud, V8 engine. That's my home, the just the noise and the panache and the fast speed. I'm not outrageous, of course, but that's something that I love is just, fast cars and, big V8s and I guess in a sense, American muscle. Um, and either that or, I love my fiance and I are always at the beach. We're like beach bums, we walk 15 minutes to the beach and then we eat, fruit and we do this and that, always barbecuing, we're generally like outside people. And so I think whenever I'm not inside practicing, I'm either outside, barbecuing or just eating something or at the beach or behind a very large muscle car. Yeah. It's a weird image, I guess, of, who is this person that you're talking to?
No, it makes so much sense. The last person that I interviewed was Lech Anton Ujinski, and
Oh, yeah,
he
yeah, yeah.
and he was just telling me that when he doesn't play the viola, he's like riding motorcycles and pretty awesome roads, and it's his thing. Like he loves adrenaline, and because I was asking him if he did yoga or something like that, and he was like, it's actually kind of the opposite. So.
It's so funny. It's so funny, just like, people's perception of what a classical musician is. They just think of us as like people who wear tuxedos all the time and play, a Beethoven symphony. And we're just rolling up in Mustangs and, we're out with our sunglasses and that's who we are. We're people too.
Exactly. We are people, believe it or not. Awesome. We always end this with the question which is related to the reason why we created this channel. So this is a channel that we created for violists in Brazil, and we have violists from now like all around the world following us, and other um, people from other instruments also. But we basically created this to, talk to a lot of violists from Brazil and outside Brazil, and also to share a lot of content regarding the viola because Corona time is coronavirus is just a really hard time for us. A lot of people they were not able to play in any ensembles. They're not able to, have lessons and stuff like that because not everyone can have a really good internet connection. So it was hard to stay motivated. And even though we are coming back little by little, there are still many barriers that prevent people from, being comfortable making music. Um, so I wanted to ask you, what are your suggestions and advices for people um, to keep motivated in such a weird time like this?
Mm. Well, I think that, it especially resonates with me right now. I posted something on my own Instagram channel, a couple of days ago. And I actually took a hiatus. I took some time away from the instrument. I think what's important to not, I mean, of course, everybody wants to be motivated and everybody wants to make music, and I miss chamber music so much. You've no, I mean, well, of course you know, but I miss it so much. But for me, something that helped me is to briefly just put a little bit of that aside and to check in with, myself as just a human being. Take away, the social media and to put the viola, somewhere, put it on a bench for right now. It's not going anywhere. The technique is still there, the music is still there. Is Jordan Bach as a human being, is he okay? Is he doing okay? And you have to really have a dialogue with yourself and be honest with yourself because, you are you, right? And so you have to, if you're not okay, you have to take the time in order to be okay, because if you're sort of struggling as a human and expect to be an artist, it's not really going to work. Of course you're going to be vulnerable, which is, as in terms of art is something that is incredibly valuable in art, but at the same time, you have to be okay in terms of your mental health. You have to prioritize mental health because at the end of the day, when you don't have an instrument in front or on your shoulder, you're just a human being. And so you have to make sure that that aspect of you is okay. In terms of, I guess, in terms of staying motivated and with practicing and finding that sense of music, really, again, um, it doesn't really work so much, I guess, in terms of bad internet connection, but I always say find a circle. If it's a couple friends, if you can have some, a Zoom meeting, I always feel like it's just too official, but, a Facebook Messenger group or something, and share. Always be 110% honest and share, whatever it is. If you want to play something, you can play something. And just for the sake of playing something, it's just, all it is to share and things that you want and wish could happen in the next however many months we're going to be here. And to not be only vulnerable in your own little space, but to find other people that you can open up to. And, if you have, several friends that are willing, and I'm sure they are, right? Because most of us in this field, we don't have anything. We're sort of, we can't travel, especially those of us in the United States. We can't travel anywhere, a lot of places. Find people that are also, dealing with some circumstances and be open and be vulnerable. And perhaps, within that, hearing other influences and hearing other people's ideas and, worries and perhaps even wants in life and in music, that maybe that can serve as an inspiration for what you might want to do. And so take that to wherever your workbench is, where your practice room is, and maybe that can open up some possibilities and open up some doors. Yeah.
Oh, those are such kind words. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for, taking some of your time for being here with us today. We really appreciate all the things that you told us. It was so good to process everything. And you have so many people that know you in Brazil and that really like your playing and they really appreciate your playing.
Oh,
So
thank
I just
you.
really wanted to say thank you for being
Well,
here.
I am incredibly honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And when this is all over, let's do something in Brazil. I am
Yes,
happy to come. I'm absolutely happy to come.
yes. Once uh the immigration border is open again for Brazilians, which right now it's not, you know,
Yes.
it's yes, let's totally do something. And so everyone who is still watching, make sure that you follow Jordan Bach on Instagram and on social media. Make sure that you listen to his music. You're gonna love it. If I may say, make sure you check out his live interview on Instagram with Iberê, which was a few weeks ago, because they talk about something that is extremely important in my point of view, especially with all the current affairs. Um, so, yeah, thank you once again so much for being here, and I hope you have a good one.
Thank you. Same to you, and thanks everyone for watching. It's really a
Thank,
pleasure.
thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Ok, moçada. Muito obrigado ao pessoal que ficou aqui com a gente. E fiquem ligados, porque na sexta-feira, às 2 horas da tarde, no horário de Brasília, nós vamos ter nossa entrevista aqui no Instagram com a Sara Fernandes. And I'm just gonna say this in English in case there are English speakers here. On Friday at 2 p.m. in Brazil's time, or let's say 12 p.m. in Central Daylight Time, which is the one I'm right now in these states, we are going to have our live interview with Sara Fernandez from Spain, and I hope to see you guys there. So thank you very much for being here, and see you guys on Friday.